Picture this. You wake up tomorrow and the grocery stores are empty. No deliveries are coming. No resupply trucks on the horizon. This isn't a dystopian fantasy. This was Tuesday morning in London, 1942. In Berlin, 1944. In countless cities across a war-torn world where survival meant looking at your neighborhood with completely different eyes. What if I told you that the concrete jungle you walk through every day is actually teeming with food, that the skills which sustained millions during humanity's darkest hour are still there, waiting in the cracks of sidewalks and the branches overhead, hidden in plain sight? We live in an age of abundance, so complete that we've forgotten what scarcity truly means. Our supermarkets overflow with produce shipped from 6 continents. Our refrigerators hum with reliable electricity. But beneath this veneer of stability, the same fragilities that plagued the 1940s still lurk. Supply chains stretch across oceans like spider silk, strong until they're not. Climate patterns shift unpredictably. Global tensions simmer. The people of World War II didn't have the luxury of assuming tomorrow would look like today. When bombs fell and blockades tightened, when ration cards allowed only a fraction of what a body needed to thrive, they did something extraordinary. They stopped seeing their cities as concrete deserts and started seeing them as ecosystems. Every park became a pantry, every vacant lot a potential feast, every waterway a fishing ground. This wasn't just about victory gardens tucked behind row houses, though those fed millions. This was about actively hunting, gathering and harvesting from the urban wilderness that surrounded them. They became foragers in a landscape we've trained ourselves to believe is lifeless. They proved it wasn't. When resources were scarce, creativity took center stage in the kitchen. People learned to make do with what little they had, transforming simple, sometimes overlooked ingredients into nourishing meals. Recipes were swapped and adapted, often scribbled onto scraps of paper or passed along by word of mouth. Necessity, really, became the mother of invention, and every meal told a story of resilience and ingenuity. Walk the streets of wartime London at dawn, and you might have encountered something startling. Neighbours on rooftops, setting snares for pigeons and rabbits. These birds weren't just pests, they were protein. Pigeon pie became a staple, the meat dark and rich, stretched with whatever vegetables could be found. Rabbits, kept in makeshift hutches on balconies and rooftops, bred quickly and converted scraps into sustenance. The techniques were simple, but required knowledge passed quietly between neighbours. Wire snares fashioned from coat hangers, box traps baited with vegetable peelings, even sparrows, once considered too small to bother with, found their way into cooking pots when hunger dictated. People learned to process these animals quickly, waste nothing, and share the knowledge that kept families alive. Then came the bombs. Ironically, destruction created opportunity. Where buildings once stood, sunlight suddenly flooded ground that hadn't seen daylight in decades. And where sunlight touches disturbed soil, life explodes. Bomb sites became accidental gardens, erupting with plant species that thrived in chaos. Rosebay willow herb, called bombweed for its habit of colonizing blast zones, produced edible young shoots. Nettle patches grew thick and tall, their leaves packed with iron and vitamins when cooked properly. Foragers learned to read the landscape of destruction. Recently disturbed earth meant edible weeds would follow within weeks. Broken basement floors might flood with rainwater, creating temporary habitats for edible aquatic plants. The rubble itself became a map. Those who knew how to read it found food where others saw only ruins. Water, too, became a resource in unexpected ways. Canals clogged with debris still held fish. Rivers that had been ignored for decades suddenly mattered again. Improvised fishing lines made from unwound electrical wire, hooks bent from pins and needles, sinkers formed from twisted lead. The ingenuity was, honestly, staggering. Some even harvested from standing water in bomb craters, catching whatever had washed in during floods. Eels particularly thrived in the disturbed waterways of bombed cities, and those who overcame their squeamishness found them surprisingly nutritious. Every city dweller has walked past dandelions 1,000 times, usually cursing them as weeds, but during the war, people saw them as salvation. The entire plant is edible, leaves bitter but vitamin-rich, roots roasted as a coffee substitute, flowers fermented into wine. A single vacant lot could yield pounds of dandelion greens, and they grew everywhere, pushing through cracks in pavement with stubborn determination. Plantain, not the banana relative, but the humble broadleaf plant that grows in every trampled lawn, became a staple green. Young leaves went into salads. Older leaves were boiled like spinach. The seeds, collected and ground, stretched flower supplies. People who had spent their entire lives walking over plantain suddenly knelt beside it with gratitude. Chickweed, that delicate, sprawling plant with tiny white flowers, was prized for its mild flavour and the fact that it grew year-round. It appeared in sandwiches, soups and salads, a reliable source of fresh greens when everything else had been harvested to exhaustion. But the real treasure hung overhead. Urban trees, planted generations earlier for shade and beauty, revealed their edible secrets. Linden trees produced leaves in spring that, when young and tender, tasted like mild lettuce. Their flowers made a soothing tea. Mulberry trees, common in city parks, dropped fruit that stained sidewalks purple, fruit that hungry people gathered by the basketful, eating fresh or preserving as jam with hoarded sugar rations. Even oaks contributed. Acorns, which are, bitter and tannic when raw, could actually be processed through repeated boiling and soaking to produce a starchy, nutritious flour. The process was definitely labour-intensive, requiring a lot of patience and, of course, plenty of water, but it worked. People who learned it passed the knowledge along like precious currency. The cardinal rule then as now is to know what you're picking. Misidentification could mean sickness or even worse. Foragers learned to consult the elderly, those who remembered a time before cities grew so large. They cross-referenced what they found with library books and studied specimens carefully. They avoided areas too close to factories or roads where contamination was likely. They tested small amounts first, waited, and then proceeded. Survival required both courage and caution. Sometimes you just had to make do with whatever was at hand. The improvised arsenal was born out of necessity, using tools and resources that were never meant for survival, but, well, somehow they worked. Each item told a story of adaptation and ingenuity, showing just how creative people could be when it really mattered. Desperation breeds innovation. When you can't buy a knife, you make one from broken glass, wrapped at one end with cloth for grip. When you need a digging tool, a sharpened stick does the work of a trowel, And when snares are needed, coat hangers transform into spring traps with just a few bends and twists. Foragers became experts in repurposing. Tin cans became cooking vessels, storage containers, and even crude cutting tools when opened and flattened. Bottles were filled with foraged goods, sealed with improvised stoppers, and stored in cool cellars. Old newspapers wrapped around gathered greens kept them fresh for a few precious extra hours. The best foragers kept mental maps of their territory. They knew which parks had the densest nettle patches, which bomb sites grew the most chickweed, and which stretches of canal held fish. This knowledge was shared selectively. Too many people harvesting the same spot would deplete it. Community networks formed, informal but vital, where information about abundance was traded like goods. Preservation mattered just as much as collection. Fresh greens, you see, wilted within mere hours. Foraged mushrooms, well, they needed immediate attention. So people either learned or perhaps remembered those old techniques, drying herbs and greens on racks in attics or sunny windowsills, creating stores that would last through the winter. Simple fermentation transformed cabbage and other vegetables into sauerkraut, both preserving them and making them more digestible. These weren't just survival tactics, they were the accumulated wisdom of centuries, suddenly relevant once again. Here's what they understood and what we've forgotten. Foraging isn't just about filling your stomach when there's nothing else. It's about reclaiming agency in an uncertain world. It's about looking at your environment and seeing potential instead of pavement. It's about possessing knowledge that makes you fundamentally harder to break. The people who foraged during World War II weren't just surviving. They were, honestly, maintaining their humanity in circumstances designed to strip it away. They shared their discoveries, they taught their children, they created small pockets of abundance in a landscape of scarcity, and in doing so, they strengthened bonds that pure commerce can never create. Today you don't need to wait for crisis to learn these skills. The plants are still there, growing in the margins. We've, stopped noticing. The knowledge is still accessible. Every dandelion is a small act of resilience waiting to happen. Every identified edible tree is a piece of infrastructure you now possess that most people don't even know exists. This isn't about fear. It's about empowerment. It's about walking through your neighborhood and understanding deeply that you are more capable than you believed, that your ancestors held knowledge which can flow through you again if you choose to learn it. The cities of World War II held millions who would have starved without these skills. Our cities today hold millions who've never needed them. Yet, the difference between helplessness and resilience is simply knowledge. The question isn't whether you'll ever need to forage for survival. The question is, what kind of person do you want to be? Someone who knows only the route from home to supermarket, or someone who understands that food, community, and self-reliance can emerge from the most unexpected places? The concrete beneath your feet is thinner than you think. Life pushes through it constantly. All you have to do is learn to see it again. If this story sparked something in you, if you're ready to see your world through different eyes, then subscribe to Through Time. Share this with someone who needs to remember that humans are more resilient than we've allowed ourselves to become. Our history is filled with wisdom waiting to be rediscovered. Let's find it together.